The gospel lesson today is from the Gospel of John. We're in chapter 16, verses 20 through 24. I tell you the truth, you will weep and mourn while the world rejoices. You will grieve, but your grief will turn to joy. A woman giving birth to a child has pain because her time has come, but when her baby is born, she forgets the anguish because of her joy that a child is born into the world. And so with you. Now is your time of grief, but I will see you again, and you will rejoice, and no one will take away your joy. In that day you will no longer ask me anything. I tell you the truth, my Father will give you whatever you ask in my name. Until now you have not asked for anything in my name. Ask, and you will receive, and your joy will be complete. This is the reading of the word of our Lord. You may be seated. Charlie Brown. Charlie Brown is kind of a hapless individual. Charlie Brown has, struggles in life. Maybe I relate to Charlie Brown too much sometimes, because in many ways he's kind of sad. He's kind of frustrated. Charlie Brown just seems to not have a very straight path. His path in life is quite crooked, as many of ours are. Now Lucy on the other hand, she looks pretty happy there, doesn't she? Lucy is actually the source of some of Charlie Brown's angst, as it turns out. And we have that demonstrated quite well in the next slide. Yeah. Now you may recall that Charlie Brown has this dream of kicking that football. He's going to kick it really far, and he is constantly being goaded into trying it again, right? Charlie Brown's going to kick that football, and this time he's really going to kick it, except what does Lucy do? Yeah, every time she pulls the football away, poor Charlie Brown goes flying, and when he does, how does he respond? Good grief, he says. Good grief. Yeah. That is the topic that we're talking about today. And in many ways, it just doesn't make sense. Because good and grief don't sound like two things that should go in the same phrase, do they? Because grief doesn't seem like it would ever be good. Now, here's the interesting thing. Jesus suggests that there are good kinds of grief. Can you imagine? It's a little hard to imagine. I served at a church in Indiana. It was a big downtown cathedral church, and I was not the senior pastor. I was an associate pastor there. And I served there for 2 years. I'm always interested in the history of a church, and we heard a little bit about the history of our church this morning. This church has a really deep and powerful and wonderful history. One that if you're attending here, you probably would like to know, and we're working on getting that story available for everybody so that you can read it yourself. But at Logansport, they built a big, beautiful church in Logansport about 1850. And it was a huge brick church, and I saw pictures of it. Amazing church, beautiful church. In about 1900, they decided they needed a new church. They had a huge congregation at the time. They had plenty of money, I'm sure. But buildings, I just kept thinking about, they tore that building to the ground. They just brought in a wrecking ball and they just trashed the place, tore it right down to the ground, started with a new hole in the ground, and built a brand new church. I thought, how do you do that? We're so connected to our buildings. They're so important to us. They're such a part of our tradition and the place that we grew up and the place that we worshiped and the place that we married and the place that we buried. This is the place. And can you imagine standing across the street and watching all of that history be reduced to rubble? It's just almost incomprehensible to me when I think about it. It's just a line in their history, and we tore down the old church and built a new one. Okay, what did that mean to the people that were involved in that kind of church? It had to represent some kind of grief. When I went to the church in Presque Isle to Grant, I realized that the year after I started there would be the 20th anniversary of the loss of their church building. A part of what I did there when I first went was I interviewed all the people one at a time. They came to my office at appointed times, and I spent at least a half an hour to an hour with each one and just talked to them. And almost every one of them broke down in tears because of the loss of their church building. It hurt. It hurt bad 19 years after the fact. And they're in this beautiful building, right? This beautiful, new, wonderful facility that most of us could only dream of. There they are, and they are mourning the loss of that old church building. So we did have a remembrance service and a lot of activities around it. And now it's been 30 years this year. Yeah. So how would you feel? You know, when we talk about grief, we're usually talking about loss, right? That's what we're talking about, some kind of loss. And most of the time when we think about grief, we're talking about the loss of someone we loved. That's the thing that we most think about when we're thinking about grief. But I want to tell you that there's a lot of other kinds of grief. Grief that are linked to frustrations, grief that is linked to fears and hurt, a grief that is linked to different opinions and different tastes and different hopes and dreams. And all those things can cause grief. So we're going to kind of rethink grief during this message, and we're not going to do it today too much, but I am going to introduce it, and we'll get into it more next week. I'd like you to think of grief as maybe the loss of normal. The loss of normal. The loss of paradigm. You all know what paradigm it is. Paradigm is the thing that we expect to happen, that we think will happen, that we have experienced over and over and over in our lives, and we don't expect it to change. The loss of paradigm. Maybe the loss of routine. Ultimately, the loss of comfort. Yeah. See, one of the things about life is that we like comfort. We like it a lot. I walk into the house and I'm drawn to that chair in the corner there. It has my name on it because it's comfortable, right? And I like comfort. You like comfort. I know you do. But one of the things that makes us most uncomfortable is change. And when we get uncomfortable because of change, it causes grief. Because we're grieving the loss of what was, right? At the same time, hopefully, we're embracing the what will be. for what is now. About 20 years ago, something like that, I went to the normal Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house. We had Thanksgiving dinner, and we did what we always do. We set up the tables in long rows. You know, we had the dining room table and another table and then a card table, and we just keep adding tables as necessary, depending how many people were going to be there. And my dad had made these little wooden blocks that went under the various table legs so that all the tables would be the same height. And then we strung out a huge, long tablecloth that covered all the tables and kind of made them into one. Now, we had been doing that for not 20 years. We'd been doing it for not 30 years or 40 years, at least 50 years, because they had been in the house at that point, if I remember right, 52 years we'd been doing that. It was a tradition. It was something I expected. Have that whole family gathered around that long table, and there we were gathered around the long table, and I found myself getting very emotional. Very emotional. In fact, so emotional that at one point I had to leave the table and go into the restroom and close the door because I just needed some time. You see, I knew that that was going to be the last Thanksgiving. In that house, in that way, in that tradition, with that family, the way we had done it for so many years, I knew it was going to be the last one. Mom and Dad had been trying to sell the house. It was too much. They couldn't mow the lawn anymore. They couldn't keep up with it. And the for sale sign was out in the front yard. And sure enough, I was right. It was the last Thanksgiving in that house. You know what? We had Thanksgivings after that, and they were good. But it was different. It was change. And when we have change, we have grief because of loss. Here's the great lie. I want you to know the great lie, and then I'm going to wrap it up for today. Here's the great lie. If we do what we have always done, we will get what we've always gotten. Have you heard that one? Most of you have heard that. If we do what we've always done, we'll get what we have always gotten. Now, anybody that knows anything about pain medication understands something about pain medication. After you're on it a while, what happens? It doesn't work that well anymore, does it? You're doing what you've always done, but you're not getting the same results anymore. That's why this is the great lie that I just told you. There's this thing called the law of diminishing returns. Are you aware of that? The law of diminishing returns. It means if you keep doing what you've always done, you're going to get less than you had before. And if you still keep doing it, you're going to have less than you had before. That, and it keeps getting worse and worse and worse. You'll find you have to up that pain medication and up it again and up it again in order to get the same results, and eventually there won't be any way to get the same results. The great lie is if we do what we've always done, we'll get what we've always got. The devil's tool, I'm going to tell you right now, is comfort. We like comfort, and the devil invites us into comfort. And when we get comfortable, well, we don't get a whole lot done. We'll talk more about that next week. God bless.